I I remember a time I was up in a tree. We were at Beaver Creek State Park. We were having a picnic. My mom, my dad, my sister, and I. My dad and I did some fishing, or we're going to do some fishing, but the thing that sticks out to me the most is that I'm in a tree. Now, my dad picked up my sister and put her in the tree, and she did great. She was fine with it. She did gymnastics as a child. I read a lot as a child. The Lord did not build me with the proper tree climbing body in mind. And so my dad, bless his heart, in his infinite wisdom, picks me up and puts me in a tree, probably roughly 6-7 feet off the ground. And I'm freaking out because I'm like, how am I supposed to get down? Because it's not like, it wasn't one of those trees that it's easy to climb. It was trunk split, and I'm sitting up there. And I didn't want to be up there, but I'm in there. And I can't think to myself, how am I supposed to get down? And my dad was like, no, it's fine. Just jump. Again, and I cannot stress this enough, I am not an athletically built person. Never have been, and I'm definitely not right now. And so the thought of jumping out of the tree that I didn't even want to be in the first place was not good. It was terrifying, except for the fact that my dad said and kept saying, it's fine, I'll catch you. And he did. So, good for him. Because what he wanted me to do was kind of control fall out of the tree, and he would catch me and sit me on the ground. And that's what happened. I would like to tell you, to this day still, I don't climb trees. It's not going to happen. I have never been that big of a fan of heights in my life. I can remember the first time I flew in an airplane. It wasn't until I was working on my master's and we were traveling to Turkey. So the first time I ever flew in an airplane, we went from Pittsburgh to Chicago and then Chicago nonstop to Istanbul. That is a lot for someone who has never been flying. And my dad, again, bless his heart, in his infinite wisdom told me, no, it's fine. It's just like riding a bus. To which I said, no, because you're in the air. And eventually he said, you'll be fine, just relax. And I was fine. And I realize now that the tree, and a bunch of other times where my dad has just worked so hard to scare the living daylights out of me, were done to teach me about facing fear. See, in the tree, I was like, I'm not safe. This is not safe. My dad is not going to catch me. Except that he kept saying, I will catch you. It's going to be fine. And so the looks of the situation were really deceiving to me. It was very suspect to me that I was going to walk out of this without any broken bones or scratches. Yet my dad promised me and said, it's going to be fine. Just fall. It looked like it would have been safe. It should have been safe. I had no reason not to trust my dad. And yet, because of the stimuli in the world, because of looking and doing the logical thing, I was terrified. And I'm not saying that logic is not a good thing. I think logic is great and wonderful. The problem is that sometimes that logic takes us to a place of fear. There is some sort of disconnect in our heads. And we can't keep straight in our mind that things are going to work out. And you can't do this, especially when you're working through a crisis, through something that is going on, because you have to stop and look at the facts. And what do we do as people? We try to plan and we try to fix things. And I think that's why the story of David and Goliath is so utterly fascinating to me this morning. And we know this story. This is one of the ones that we tell our kids all the time. And we talked about David last week. Little simple David, ruddy, handsome youth, shepherd, going to be king. Awesome, cool, wonderful. Except now we're introduced in this middle of this conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines. And it's further complicated by the fact that they have a giant. Interestingly enough, some scholars and some theologians believe that Goliath was actually one of the Nephilim mentioned in the Bible, which is a whole other topic. But all of that is to say, Goliath is not normal. He's built different to an alarming degree. I think it's something like 9 feet tall and muscular, having a spear that is bigger than most people. And what he is doing is he is taunting the other army. And we know how this story goes, right? David eventually comes up, takes a rock, smacks him in the head. Goliath falls over. That's the PG version. The PG-13 version is then he runs over with Goliath's own sword and takes his head off. And that's how the story ends. And it's this wonderful thing, it's this wonderful trope that has been built into us for so long. The David versus Goliath story. And here's the thing about it. Every single person always wants to be David. When we're looking at this story, when we're reading this story, what is it we think? I want to be David in this story. I want to be the scrappy little kid facing off against insurmountable odds, and everything's fine because he knows and truly believes and trusts that God has his back. We're probably not David in this story. On our best days, there is a chance. So then, if we want to look at this story and figure out how we can apply it to our lives, we have to come to grips with the fact, who are we? What does this narrative speak to us? And sometimes people will say, well, we're the army then. We're the army that was paralyzed by fear and shaking and afraid to do things. And it took somebody to come and remind us of the strength and the power of God, that we would come and we would overcome this horrible battle that we're facing. I would suggest maybe. It's also really hard to insert yourself in biblical narratives. And really what I mean when I say that is, it's just what part of this story speaks to us that we can grasp onto, that we can do something with to apply to our lives. And nobody really talks about King Saul in this whole encounter. Everyone's focused on the action and excitement of David versus Goliath, of the rock flying through the air, of the giant falling, and the message and the story that everything's fine because God has our back. Nobody really ever talks about King Saul. See, at this point, David has already been anointed by Samuel to be the next king. So everything that David does right now is building his name, building his reputation, so that when the time comes and he is king, it is not seen as something that is out of left field or a very big surprise. They could say, oh, that's the guy who killed Goliath. That's the guy who was a great warrior. That tracks. That makes sense, that's a thing that's going to happen. And yet look at what it is that Saul does in this moment. Saul was a king chosen by God to be king when the people wanted a king and God said, you don't want that, but whatever, do it your way. And so Saul should know everything that David knows. He should understand and know because they worship the same God, right? Except that what he does in this, he tries to control the situation. And I'm not painting Saul in a negative light. I think it's very noble that he doesn't want to send a child to his death. And so knowing that God is with him, that God is for him, the Ark of the Covenant, all that fun stuff, knowing every little detail and thing about that, he tries to control the situation still. He gives David his own armor. Now, Saul is an adult, a grown man, and he tries to give a child his armor. It's not going to fit. And the reason it's not going to fit is because it was not made for David. This was Saul trying to control things and trying to make sure that everything was okay. Because in those moments of crisis, in those moments of fear, when we find ourselves stuck in the tree, we will do everything we can to take control of the situation. And in that, what we find is that it doesn't always work. And the reason it doesn't always work is because maybe it wasn't meant to. What we have in this story is Saul trying to take control of the narrative and David saying, no, this is fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Awesome. Wonderful. I'm so glad, David, that you are A-okay with everything that is about to go on and everything that could happen. King Saul says, I'm not. And yet he has to, at a certain point, let go. Saul is the king. He could say, no, this isn't a thing that's going to happen. I don't want this to happen. Instead, he okays it. He allows it. He accepts that this is a thing that's going to happen. And that right there should give us the most hope. Because what he does in that instant, in that moment, is that he lets go. There's a lot riding on this battle. There's the possibility of being enslaved. There's the possibility of being taken over. There's the possibility of your God now being the weaker God. And what kind of God is that? There are a lot of things that could 110% go wrong in this story. And yet Saul, in his infinite wisdom, tells the kid with rope, sure, go fight the giant. That is a terrifying prospect. Because I'm sure, if we're being honest, and Saul were being honest, he was not sure that this was going to work out. David is sure, because David is the bastion of hope in this story. David is the one who says, no, this is fine because God is with us. We're not David, though. We are the people panicking and worrying and trying to control every little thing because that's what we do when we're scared. We want to be David, not because he is able to kill the giant, but because his faith is able to take him from a place where everybody is freaking out around him, and he is the calm center of the universe because he knows, understands, and believes that God ultimately will prevail. That eventually everything is going to be fine because God said it's going to be fine. Our story from the gospel this morning is it's one of the ones we actually talked about at VBS. The boat. There's a storm. People are panicking, rightly so, because boats in and of themselves are kind of terrifying things if we think about it. And this is a boat in a storm, and this is a boat in a storm that we probably don't have a lot of reference for because we have modern boats with like fiberglass and GPS and motors and all of these things. But the boats that the disciples were on at this point, completely and utterly dependent upon the thing that they're sailing on. Being on a boat in general, especially at that time, is a practice in faith. And so they go because Jesus says, we're going to go to the other side. And promptly, Jesus does one of the most beautiful things that he does in all of the Gospels. He takes a nap. What would Jesus do? Napping is now on the table, guys. Napping when things are going haywire around you. Like, that's the other piece here. There were a bunch of other boats, great windstorm, waves beat on the boat. They're already being swamped. They're taking on water. Everybody is panicking. And Jesus is just sleeping right through it. Bless his heart. I have discovered that as a parent, as I get older, I'm becoming a lighter and lighter sleeper, like 9 times out of 10. So I'm able to see and hear if somebody's in the hallway going somewhere. I can determine by the sound of their footsteps what room they're going in, if they're going downstairs, if they're going to the bathroom, like what is going on. I'm able to do that. And I'm like, great, awesome. I would rather be sleeping. And yet this is a windstorm that Jesus is in the middle of, and he is taking a nap, and they go to Jesus, and he freaks out. And not Jesus freaks out, the disciples are freaking out, saying, hey, could you maybe not sleep right now while we're about to die? And the reason that I find this so beautiful is because it is one of the most human things that Jesus does. He's tired, so he takes a nap. He is taking care of himself so that he can help and take care of others. One of the hardest things for people to learn to do, especially when it feels like the world is crashing down around you, especially when you're on the boat and it's rocking and there's water everywhere and you're panicking, running around like a chicken with your head cut off and saying, Jesus, do you just not care that we're all dying up here? And clearly that's not the case. That clearly 100% is not the case, because what Jesus does then is he just stands up and he looks at the storm and is like, knock it off. Just stop. And he does it more poetically. Peace, be still. He commands everything to stop and to calm down, which he could have done from the beginning. And here's the thing. Jesus was on the boat. If we believe in a sovereign God who has control over all time and all space, and that everything is predetermined, even though we don't know that or understand that, and that's a whole other sermon, if we believe all of that, then why would we assume that God would allow Jesus to die on this boat? And if God would not allow Jesus to die on this boat, then it stands to reason that God would not want the disciples to die on this boat. Because if at any point one of those things happen, before they're supposed to happen, the entire plan is done. It can't possibly work. And so when Jesus stands up and he says to them, why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? It is because he knows and understands what is going on and why things are happening the way that they're happening. Because ultimately, through the storm, through the muck and the mire of everything, it's going to be okay. And that's the beauty of it. Knowing that things are going to be fine, knowing that everything is going to be okay. I tell my kids from time to time, hey, it's fine, it's going to be okay. It's not the end of the world. That is one of my favorite parental sayings in the world. Although some of them, I'm not going to throw them under the bus, one of them particularly will sometimes say, no, it is the end of the world. And I have to remind them, no, it's not, because you're still here. You're still doing what it is you need to do. Time and time again, we have these promises from God. Not that we're going to be removed from the storm, not that everything is going to be fine and dandy, not that we're going to have smooth sailing and pleasant seas our whole life. No, what we are promised instead of that comfort here and now is that it's going to be okay. And what we are left with as people is to decide if we believe that or not. If we don't believe it, that puts us in the place of the soldiers who are scared and shaking and terrified of the scary giant. If we kind of sort of believe that, that puts us in the place of Saul, where it's like, okay, this could conceivably happen because God is a God of miracles, but I'm going to help and make sure that this happens. Here is a spoiler for a lot of when that happens in the Bible. It doesn't work. It doesn't work when Abraham tries it. It doesn't work when Saul tries it. There are times in our lives where we don't have control as much as we would like to. And it is those times where we have to kind of say, okay, I'm going to be the insane child with a rope and some rocks to go fight this giant because I believe that it will happen. We need to determine if we truly believe in what God says. Because if we don't, what are we doing? And if we do, it grants us this really, really annoying thing that Jesus calls the peace that passes understanding. Where even if the world is falling down around us, we know and believe that God said it's going to be fine. And we are weirdly calm about it. We need to remember who is with us. We need to remember what we believe. And we need to know, not just think, not just hope, but know in our hearts it's going to be okay. Amen.